So I'm going to talk about how we organise our Dormouse Monitoring in Kent. So just to give you a little bit of background about the Kent Mammal Group, the group was set up in 1997. We're quite a large group. We have 180 members at the moment, and our aims are to promote the recording and study of mammals in Kent, to help in the conservation of the county's mammals, to provide a forum for discussion about the county's mammals, and to raise awareness. We're a very active group. We have monthly meetings where we have guest speakers. We have a quarterly newsletter. We also have a monthly e-bulletin to keep our members up to date with news and events. And we have our own website and Facebook page as well. And we regularly attend events around the county, country shows, where we take along a few captive animals to get people interested in mammals. We also run training courses. Our most popular ones are small mammal trapping, where we teach people how to survey for small mammals and identify them, and also identification of larger mammals from their field signs. We have been trying to survey the whole county for mammals on a tetrad basis, and we also have a marine mammal expert in our group, so we survey by air and by sea for seals and cetaceans. And this is all culminated in our Kent Mammal Atlas, which is a 10-year atlas which we hope to publish next spring. So where did Dormouse Monitoring start in Kent? Well, in May 1990, our first monitoring site was set up at Spongwood. And this was really instigated by Paul Bright, another young photograph of him, and Pat Morris, who had some boxes and wanted to set up some sites in different habitats to those down in Somerset. And Shirley Thompson, who's shown here, had noticed dormouse nests in the woodland after some coppicing work, so she knew dormice were there. And so the nest box scheme was set up in the May of that year, and by September there were 40 dormice using the boxes. And Shirley's been monitoring that site ever since. In 1992, the scheme was extended to some other sites in the county. And as Pat said, Natural England launched its species recovery programme, and it wanted a venue close to London, and so this was held at Highland Barn, which was the new headquarters of the Kent Wildlife Trust. In 1993 to 94, Paul Bright and his colleagues carried out some of those radio tracking studies that Pat mentioned at Spongwood to try to find out more about what the dormice were feeding on, what they were doing, how they were behaving. Then in 1995, Ken West, who's the president of Kent Mammal Group, trained for his licence, and it was really after that that the scheme really expanded. He was a landowner, he had lots of contacts with other landowners, so he got access to sites where dormice could be monitored, and he set about trying to monitor throughout the county in a whole range of different habitats. And it was really his enthusiasm and drive that led to the number of sites that we have now, and he has been one of our keenest dormouse trainers as well. So currently we have a Dormouse Subcommittee as part of Kent Mammal Group. Steve Songhurst is the chair of our committee, and he's also what we call our second referee. So if people have been training for sites and they need a second reference, he assesses them. He's also a nature reserve warden and a Dormouse monitor himself. We also have Anne Coombs, who's just taken on the role of Dormouse Monitoring Site Coordinator. We've had 3 different people in this role over the years. It's a bit of a thankless task because it's trying to get information from all the monitors and update records of who's monitoring where, how many boxes there are. I'll talk a bit more about this later. I'm the Dormouse Training Coordinator, so I teach training courses, and I also make sure people fill out their training logs and go through the correct training procedure. Now, when I asked Jason for a photograph of himself, I expected one of him sort of building a few nest boxes or perhaps checking nest boxes. Fortunately, he told me he was very camera shy, and this was the only photograph that I could show. But he is our new nest box construction and salesperson, so he actually sells the boxes for us and is going to be making them soon as well. And Ken West was our site sort of suitability assessor, so he would go out and look at new sites to see if dormice were likely to be there, whether it was a suitable place to put boxes up, and advise the landowners where to put the boxes and help them to actually erect the boxes. But he's retiring from that now because he's been doing this for a long time, and we're hoping that someone else is going to take on that role very soon. So our training process consists of people approaching us saying, I'd like to train for my Dormouse licence. And these come from all walks of life. Sometimes they're landowners who've just discovered that they have dormice on their sites and want to monitor them themselves. They could be staff of the countryside partnerships, the wildlife trusts, country park wardens. A lot of them are ecologists who'd like to get licences for their jobs, but also want to help Kent Mammal Group as well. Some are university lecturers, students. We've had some bird ringers convert to mammals. We've also had a lot of just local keen people who are generally interested in wildlife. So we invite them to come along and attend a Dormouse Ecology and Conservation course, either one of the ones that the Mammal Society run in Kent or Kent Mammal Group one. And we also then get them to come along to a Dormouse handling workshop where we use our captive dormice at Wildwood, where I work, because that means they get to handle a larger number of dormice and a greater range of ages and breeding conditions than they might do in the wild at some of our sites where the numbers are quite low. We then allocate them a training site and a trainer, and we expect them to go out monitoring each month with their trainer. We try to limit it to maybe 2 or 3 trainees at each site at the most. And we currently have 51 trainees in Kent. We also encourage them to keep account of their training, of their experience with training logs. So we use the Dormouse training log, which was produced by the PCES. We have adapted it slightly so that it's easier to break down some of the areas. So, for example, here we've just split up the different types of breeding condition so that we can tick them off on separate visits, because it's very unusual that we'd find all those breeding conditions on the same visit. And so each area can be signed off separately. And we also have a sort of Dormouse licence application form to Kent Mammal Group where they agree to train with us and then they agree to actually help monitor a site afterwards. So once the trainer is happy that that person is competent at handling dormice safely and carrying out the surveys, they get in contact with us, we check the training forms to see that they've covered everything, and then we send out Steve Songhurst, who assesses them at their site usually. As well as checking that they can handle the dormice safely, he also asks some questions about dormouse ecology and about habitat management, because we think that's quite important if they're going to be running a scheme at a site. We did trial accredited agent status for a few years, where instead of giving people 2 references immediately, we would give them accredited agent status on one of our trainers' licences so that they would work under their licence. But we didn't find this worked particularly well because there was a lot of administration involved in it. People often got confused as to whose licence they were on, whether they were covered, and what they could do. And also it meant that the licence holder was liable for any actions carried out by their trainee. And so now we actually give 2 references. So once they have their licence, we allocate them a monitoring site. This could be an existing site that doesn't have a monitor, for example, someone's retired, or they could be joining somebody else who's got lots of boxes and needs some help. Or it could be a site that this person has already got set up and they were working towards monitoring. And we require a commitment of at least 1 year, so we get people to sign up to say once they've got their licence they will monitor that site for a minimum of a year. Most people go on to do it for much longer than that. We also set up new sites from time to time. It may be that a landowner approaches us and says, I've just discovered dormice on my site, I really want to know more about them, where they are. So that can help with the management of the site, so I can see if my management's helping them or not. And so Ken will go out, have a look at the site, and work out where the boxes should be put. And then we have the record keeping side. As I said, Anne organises this, so she keeps a record of the site, how many boxes there are at the site, who's monitoring the site, who's training at that site, who owns it, who the contacts are. And she puts new trainees in touch with trainers so that they have someone to train with. She also collates all of our data at the end of the year. So around now, we start to get the records coming in from our sites. Some of them come direct to us, particularly the paper copies, whereas other people have moved over to the new online system and enter their data directly, and that goes straight to PTES. And so we have a sort of data exchange agreement with Susan at PTES, and she and Anne will get together in February or March time and exchange records, basically. We used to find there was a bit of duplication where some people sent the records to us and to PTES, but we seem to have ironed most of that out now. So we just make sure that we both have full sets of records for all our sites which are being monitored. And Anne will chase up those who haven't sent their records in. So how do we fund all our work? Well, obviously the monitoring is carried out by volunteers, and the administration work is all carried out by volunteers as well. Our training courses in the past have been subsidised by some grants that we've had, and also with the help of partner organisations, for example, Wildwood Trust, where I work, offer the classroom for free and allow me to teach the courses at a reduced cost. Nest boxes originally were all funded by the Kent Mammal Group, didn't have much funding even from the landowners, but now private landowners are seeing the value of having the boxes and are paying for those, and some of the countryside projects and the wildlife trusts are now beginning to pay for them as well at their sites. We also have members who apply to the PTS for its annual grant for help with nest boxes, usually for replacement boxes where boxes have got old and damaged. And we did have some funding from the BBC Wildlife Fund, which I'll mention in a moment. We did at one point do a lot of consultancy work as a group, which helped to fund our boxes. For example, Dormouse surveys for mitigation, road widening schemes in Kent. But we feel now that we don't really want to be involved in that sort of work because it could be a conflict of interest with our conservation work. And also we're competing with a lot of our own members. And also there's the issues of having professional liability insurance in case anything goes wrong. So we don't carry out consultancy work anymore. So the bulk of our income now is actually from our nest box sales. We have our own design of nest box. We've been building these for a long time. Ken couldn't quite remember when the first ones were built, but we've certainly been selling them since about 2000. And these were originally made from marine ply, but we found that that was actually being sourced from tropical rainforests, so we've now switched to sustainable birch ply from Europe. And we find these boxes are really durable, and the dormice like them as well. So recently, the Kent Mammal Group funded a workshop or a shed in Jason's back garden, Jason the diver, and he now stores all our boxes there for sale. He organises the sales, and he actually is going to start constructing the boxes. They were being constructed by an elderly gentleman who's now suffering from ill health, so Jason's going to take over. And just to give you an idea of the numbers, between March and October of this year, we sold 678 boxes. So one of the projects that we had that was funded was the Kent Homes for Dormice project. This came off the back of the BBC series Saving Planet Earth, where members of the public pledged money to fund conservation projects both in the UK and abroad. It ran from 2008 to 9, and we received a total of £5,000. The aims of the project were to boost local populations of dormice in Kent by finding out where populations still exist and monitoring them with our volunteers. Also increasing the skills of local volunteers, so we ran training courses which were funded by the scheme, and to provide new nest sites for dormice. So we set up 10 new monitoring sites. So on the map you can see the sites that we had already are those in green. The new sites were in blue, but also on the back of the project we had a lot of interest, and also the yellow sites were set up as well. And we were trying to fill in gaps between the current sites, but it didn't work quite like that because we couldn't always find suitable sites. but we were trying to increase the spread across the county. And the boxes and equipment was all funded by the project. They also funded nest tubes, which we put up in unusual habitats. So we worked with the Wildlife Trust on their roadside nature reserves to monitor those, and also with the Church of England's God's Acre project, where they were encouraging people to get interested in biodiversity in churchyards. Another aim was to try to promote conservation in Kent, and we did this by going out to more shows. We used money from the grant to fund display boards and display equipment, and ran events involving children as well. And this all culminated in a conference that we ran at the University of Greenwich, the South East Dormouse Conference, which I know quite a few of you came along to, and which was also funded by the grant. And they paid for publicity materials, so a new leaflet about dormice, promoting the group's activities, and also a new page on our website, which also included a mammal sightings page so that people could enter their mammal records. And although this grant is no longer available because the BBC Wildlife Fund have closed down, there are other organisations that you could apply for similar grants from, such as the Big Lottery Fund's Awards for All scheme. So just to summarise, our current monitoring sites, we have 110 in the county. That's nest box sites, but within those we have 75 which are actually part of the monitoring programme. So these are ones where we send the data into the National Monitoring Programme. The other 35 currently aren't in the programme. That's because perhaps they have fewer boxes than 30, so some of them might be small sites. For example, maybe 10 boxes or 5 boxes in somebody's large back garden. Some of them are only monitored erratically, so maybe people can't get out there very often, maybe they only check once or twice a year. And some of them have not actually had any dormice at them yet. So hopefully in future some of these schemes will be included in the national scheme as well. We also have 46 nest tube sites. So these are the roadside nature reserves ones and in unusual habitats. Again, some of these are quite small, so there might be only 10 or 15 tubes at each one. We have 92 licensed monitors throughout the county, so almost one per monitoring site. And at the moment we have 51 licensed trainees as well. So this just gives you an idea of the spread of the sites. This is not quite up to date, this map, but you can see the red sites are our national Dormouse monitoring sites, and those in black include the other sites, the nest box sites, but also some additional records that we have of dormice in Kent from perhaps hazelnuts or dormice brought in by cats and that sort of thing. There are a few gaps. In East Kent, there's not a lot of ancient woodland there. There's a few patches of woodland, but it's quite secondary woodland, and the Isle of Sheppey's not really got any woodland either. And then over here, this is really Greater London, so it's not really included in the county, and this is all Romney Marsh. So we can't cover a complete county, but I think we've got fairly good coverage at the moment. It doesn't always run smoothly with our coordination. Coordinating the Dormouse monitors and trainees is a bit like sort of juggling dormice. You never quite know where they all are at any one time. So people sometimes stop monitoring a site without telling us, or they move to another site and don't always let us know. Our Dormouse sort of administrator tries to contact them regularly, but we don't always get response from everybody. It can be difficult finding training sites for people because they always want one that's fairly close to where they live. There's not always availability. Some of our trainers are retired people who prefer to go out during the week, whereas the trainees are often professional ecologists or people who work, so they want to go out and train at the weekend, so that can be difficult. We don't always get feedback straight away from trainers on how the trainees are doing, so although we do have a scheme where they should come back to us for a second reference, sometimes we just find that someone has their licence already and has started monitoring a site and they haven't let us know. And and we don't always get the feedback from the monitors as to how it's all going. But generally, with such a large scheme, I think it runs fairly well. And so some of our sites have been monitored for a very long time. And so hopefully these long-running sites will be kept going right into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hazel. What a massive mammal group you got. One or two quick questions before we move on. Oh, Roger.
Have you considered the people who are coming from professional ecology consultancies actually charging them for training and development funds to leave their company and then go off to contract work there?
Yeah, we know that other counties do that. We felt we didn't really want to go down that route because sometimes it was quite hard to distinguish between those who were making profit out of it and those who weren't, because some of them were professionals in other organisations and benefited from having a licence but weren't really ecologists. We just felt we didn't want to differentiate really, and we weren't always told when people came for training that they were ecologists. Some people would just come along as a volunteer and then later that you would find out that they were. And we just feel it's important to train the ecologists because they're the people that are going to be making the decisions about what goes on in the countryside. So we want them to be, just as good or even better than everybody else. So we didn't want to put them off either.
One more.
Hi, I was interested in what goes on in one initiative with Hello Ecology is to get more licensed people because a few years ago they were really so we're going through that programme, but one of our issues is people are getting their licence and then not following through on a commitment to helping work in Worcestershire and also the time that people take to get their licence and their personal commitment to maybe having to drive for an hour to a different site because they need to be working with someone on that site and so on. I like the sound of your form, but when people sign something, so does it work?
We can't hold people to that. Obviously, it's not. It's just an agreement between us. And we have had a few people who've got their licence and then, because they've got their licence, they've got a new job and they've moved out of the county. But we have had some who have actually come back on their weekends to do the monitoring even though they've moved to another county because they feel that they've made that commitment to us. So most of the time it has worked. People do continue for a year